Welcome back to the Paranorm Girl podcast. I am your host, Kristen. Today's conversation marks a very special moment. This will be the final guest for this season all about UFO, UAP, and ET, which means our Season 5 conclusion and finale is but a couple of weeks away. What a wild educational ride this one has been. I never suspected in my wildest dreams that the very subject I would be covering would be considered so true by the time I was finished. I am sure by now most of you have watched the historic broadcast of the Committee on Oversight and Accountability hearing on UAP. It was an excellent turnout of congresspeople, I thought, all treating the subject with an appropriate level of seriousness and interest. And of course, we heard from the panel of witnesses that included David Grush, Dave Fravor, and Ryan Graves. I'm still mulling over all that was asked and talked about, and I will explore some of that information and thoughts that occurred to me during the hearing on this season's finale closer to the end of August. I do want to note today's guest and I recorded prior to that hearing, so just please keep that in mind as you listen through. If you're wondering why we're not talking about specifics from the hearing, that is why. But please stay tuned nearer to the end of the season. I will get some of my own reaction to that hearing on the public record in our final summation on the topic. Today's show is going to be the first of two parts. My guest and I got into a lot together, including topics I hadn't already covered this season, such as animal mutilation, sightings and encounters in Australia, and government response to the UAP issue. My guest has a wide understanding about this phenomenon, and both parts of this one pack a punch. Let's do a word from our sponsor, and then I will introduce him. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to unleash the beach beast within you. This summer, Manscaped is here to help you level up your beach game with their new Beard Hedger Pro Kit. They're going past waist deep in the grooming game and diving in head first to your facial hair fantasies. The Beard Hedger is a game changer, allowing you to shape your beard like a true beach babe. So, this summer, let the beach balls bounce and turn heads all over the place. Visit manscaped.com and use code PNG for 20% off and free shipping. While you are out there officially taming that mane this summer, thanks to the Beard Hedger Pro Kit, let's not forget that all works of art begin with a clean, blank canvas. Start your beardly journey out right with Manscaped's beard shampoo and conditioner. All of the hair on your body is different, gentlemen, and the hair on your face is easier to damage than what's on your head. You need to use something specifically designed for it. Luckily for you, that all can be found in your Pro Beard Kit. So, get 20% off and free shipping with the code PNG at manscaped.com. That's 20% off with free shipping at manscaped.com and use code PNG. Manscaped Beard Hedger, 1 stroke, 1 guard, 20 lengths. My guest is an academic with a massive scientific background and a PhD in neuroscience. He is a member of the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies and has worked for many years in the field of UAP investigation and research as MUFON's National Director for Australia and New Zealand. Please enjoy my conversation with Dr. Roger Stankovic.
So I'm from Sydney, Australia, and basically my education began with a Bachelor of Science degree at the University of Sydney, and I was mainly interested in the field of pathology, and I ended up doing a PhD in neuroscience much later. In 2006, I completed a PhD in neuroscience. So I had a lot of experience in pathology of the brain and spinal cord. I was the chief scientist there at the pathology department at the University of Sydney, where we cut up a lot of human brains and looking for diseases like neurodegenerative diseases. And I specialized in motor neuron disease. And we did a lot of work on CJD, which is the equivalent of mad cow disease in humans. So I ran the laboratory, the surveillance laboratory for CJD in New South Wales. And so we got brains referred to us that were rapid dementia patients that underwent rapid dementia who were suspected of CJD. And so we screen those brains and determine based on pathology whether they have this disease or not, because it's a communicable disease. You have to report it when you see it. And so basically, and I got involved with looking at UAPs or UFOs at an early age. I didn't know too much about the topic, but as a teenager, when I was about 14 or 15, I had a sighting at my parents' property, which they had a 10-hectare property or a 25-acre property out in the west of Sydney, and in the 60s and 70s, and basically they only just recently sold that property. But basically, when I was a kid, I ventured down to the we had two dams, and I ventured down to the back dam, which was the larger dam, and it was sort of like twilight. And this was, I don't know, late 1970s or mid 70s, and basically I happened to, it was twilight, and I happened to catch a light coming in from my right, which was coming in from the south going north as I was facing the dam. And all I could say is it was an orb-like light which emitted white light. But the strange thing about it is that when it approached me, I thought it was a helicopter or an aeroplane, but it had no flashing lights and there was no sound. And then all of a sudden it stopped in front of me and hovered. And that's what really piqued my curiosity about it, because I thought, what is this thing? Can't be a plane. It could be a helicopter. But it did this really crazy maneuver where it did sort of like a figure eight or a loop-the-loop, and then went straight down onto the ground and landed and lit up the whole area, which really, just frightened the hell out of me. So I just turned around and took off, because I thought, I don't know what this thing is. And that experience really just got me really interested in UFOs. And it was quite frightening. I remember going into the farmhouse, and after the experience, just running into the kitchen, and my sister was saying to me, what's wrong? And, I was as white as a ghost, apparently, and sweating. And, it was just just a traumatic experience of not knowing what this thing was. And it was so close, I'm talking about 200 or 300 meters away from me.
Oh, wow.
So it was a fairly close encounter, but I could kick myself for not actually staying there to see what the next thing was, or what the next thing was going to happen. Was I going to see entities? What was this craft going to do, etc. So I am a bit, I suppose I just didn't have the courage to confront it at the time. But I suppose then, being a teenager and not knowing what I'd experienced, I'd took it as something threatening, and didn't stay there. I just took off and went home, at the speed of light, virtually. That's what got me interested, and I started reading books on UFOs, magazines, and that's really what you could only do. We had no internet at that stage, and it was difficult to get information off them, of what the topic was about. And I just read as much as I could, and then I got involved in networking with other researchers, in particular people overseas like Stanton Friedman and Nick Pope and Leslie Kane and a few others who I'd communicated things with, and basically then I got involved in MUFON. So I started networking initially, and what I wanted to do was to actually be involved in a proactive way by actually joining an organization where I could actually analyze reports, so from the public. So basically MUFON seemed to be the perfect outlet there. So I joined MUFON in 2015, and then shortly became the national director, and we receive civilian reports that come to us, that it could be just an account, it could be a video or a photograph that someone's taken of an unusual light we deal with abduction cases, and we deal with other things like animal mutilations that are reported to us as well. So so basically we analyze the reports. There's a database called the CMS, or the Case Management System, and that's controlled in the United States. That's actually based in Ohio right now. So the server's in Ohio, and basically people just log into their personal computer, just Google MUFON, and then they can go into their website and go into report a UFO, and from anywhere around the world, and that goes to initially goes to the through the CMS in Ohio, and then it gets divvied out to the various countries where it if there's a national director there, or if there's field investigators in that country. So, for example, in Poland, there might be a couple of field investigators or a national director there that if there's a sighting in that country, well, then that report in the United States gets sent to that national director, and then they handle that report. And that's how it's done. But we get quite a few reports for a very small population. We've only got, I'm not quite sure, we're 25 million. But we're usually up there in the statistics. We're about the top 5 of countries around the world.
Oh, wow.
That get
I didn't
the
know
most
that.
UFO. Yeah. If you look at if you join MUFON and become a member, they will give you access to the statistics as to, how many cases there are per country, what people see, whether they're triangles or orbs or saucer shaped or tic-tac shaped or whatever. So they give you all this information about the specifics, and basically we're right up there with the highest number of cases. And I can't explain that. I suppose there's a lot of cases aren't reported by the public.
Sure.
They don't know about MUFON, or they just don't want to report them because of they might see a ridicule factor associated with it. We keep everything, if you tick a box saying that you want to remain anonymous, well, then we honour that privilege. So basically, we don't disclose names. So if, I suppose if people do see a UFO and they want to report it to MUFON, their names are kept separate from the actual report. So unless they particularly want to disclose their personal details, which a lot of people don't want to.
Sure. Yeah, there's still such that high stigma factor.
That's right.
Today, with everything that's going on, even today, people are still a little queasy about being associated with it, Well, I was going to say it's good that nobody's, able to just like ring you up and report, all of these reports, that it's going through, the CMS and in a system like that. And it's all,
people still do. People still do ring. They still call me, and basically they email me separate to the MUFON database. So, and some of those cases actually turn out to be quite a bit more interesting, the ones that go through the database. I suppose it's the matter of urgency that they have, that they want to contact me directly, and some of the cases are quite interesting in terms of abductions and animal mutilations that I've had. Information sent to me on a personal basis.
Yeah. Would you be able to share some Australian cases? I personally, I'm not as familiar with UFO, ET encounters, anything like that outside of the US. I'm trying, but we were talking before we started recording. It's overwhelming. It's a lot of information to get through. So I would love, my listeners would love to hear any cases you would like to share, or just stories that you're aware of, or.
Yeah, so there's an interesting case that's come up recently where in May this year there was a lady that was driving. Probably your listeners don't know too much about Australia, other than we've got states in Australia. There's Queensland, which is North and Northern Territory. Then we've got New South Wales and Victoria down the bottom. And then we've got South Australia and Western Australia, which is quite a large state. But this lady was driving north in Queensland, and she was travelling in a remote area of central Queensland with a camper van. And It was about 1 p.m. in the afternoon, slightly cloudy, and she saw this object to her left, which looked like, and I'm only just using her description, like a green teardrop. But it was sort of like, it wasn't a structured craft. It was like a bit like a cloud, but it was well circumscribed. And it was coming towards her. And all of a sudden, it hit her car and pushed her car to the right-hand side, her van to the right-hand side of the road. And then she had to correct herself, and she heard some sort of noise where it's similar to sprinkling rice on a bit of paper, and then she heard a thump and a thump again. So the object actually hit her car. She had to I don't know. I asked her, look, how did it actually? Did your tires scrape when it pushed your car to the other side of the road? And she said, no. It just, my car ended up on the other side of the road. So we drive on the left-hand side here compared to you guys. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've driven in America before, and it's a nightmare for us to drive over there, believe me. So I suppose it'd be the same for you guys when you come over here. So we're driving on the left-hand side, and it pushed the car all the way to the right-hand side. There was no oncoming traffic. In fact, there was no traffic anywhere. And what happened is that she was so frazzled by it that she kept going. I said, look, did you see anything on the road? Did you look in the rearview mirror? Did you see anything, any debris or anything like that? Did it actually, did you see something? And she didn't. So, because she looked in her right rear vision mirror. But when she got to stop and just recollect her thoughts, one strange thing that did happen is that there was a phone call that was made just after she was hit by this object, which we can't work out what it is. And it was someone from Perth Airport who had called her saying that she called him. And that's about, I don't know, maybe 3,000 kilometers away, but she didn't make the call. So her mobile phone was on the seat, and she didn't make the call, but he received a call from her mobile phone as this thing hit the van, and he called her back 6 minutes later. And she didn't know who it was. And so she received a call from someone who she didn't call during the event. So what we're trying to do is work out, is this possible? Can an incoming call come from a phone where you haven't actually dialed a number? But it gets more interesting. So what happened? She contacted me, and she contacted another UFO investigation organization called PRA, which is Paranormal Research Australia. And we suggested that she get some dust samples off her van. And I sent a dust sample to MUFON in the United States, because we do have a lab there. It's only a small lab, and they can do what's called scanning electron microscopy of samples of whatever you give them. And it's called EDX, or energy dispersive X-ray microanalysis. And so we did we had two independent laboratories that did the dust samples on samples on the dust on her vehicle. And the laboratory in Australia found an unusual alloy, which is a composition of copper and barium, which is in the proportion of 80% to 20%. So 80% copper, 20% barium, which is very unusual because that doesn't usually exist as in the metallic form. It can be found in a powder form, but not in a metallic form. So this was covering her vehicle. And so the chief investigator said it was an anomalous alloy that was found on her car after the incident.
Just to interrupt you real quick, the copper barium mix, like, is that found? You said it can be found in powder form. Where in the world would that be found? Like, where?
Okay, so there's a company in America who I think it's American. Oh no, sorry, I can't remember the actual name of the company. But there is a company, a metallurgic company, or there's a company in the States that actually can produce it, but in powder form, but not to the ratio of 20 to 80. It seems very unusual that they've got, that we've got this particular alloy in 20 to 80%, 80 to 20% barium, or it can be manufactured on Earth. But the thing is that it's unusual because it's in its metallic form, not powder form, and it's a 80 to 20 mix. Mm-hmm. So that's what was found on her vehicle. And she thinks she lost some time as well when she got to her final destination, before she recollected her thoughts, although that's a bit hazy at the moment. So, so it's an unusual case that we're still following up. It's been completed, but I'm going to still do some more investigations on it.
That just happened in May of this year?
That's right, yeah.
Wow. It's an incredible case. Yeah, just outstanding.
Yeah, so it had the force to actually move the van to the other side of the road, but it's unusual that and she's very credible, and she's highly obsessed with what's happened to her. She's been very forthcoming with information, and she's done a write-up of her experience in terms of photographs and information about what happened to her at the time. And we've had other cases. We've had a case in New Zealand where there was a gentleman who couldn't sleep at night. This is basically he's the a CEO of a software company, so he's quite a credible person, quite an intelligent guy, and he couldn't sleep one night, and he lives next to the ocean, lives nearby the ocean, and he decided he would just go out. I can't remember what time it was, probably 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. in the morning. He decided to get a glass of wine and just go on the beach and just sit down and just try and relax, because he had a bit of insomnia. And he saw this craft out in the distance on the ocean, which had a beam going down into the ocean, and it looked like it was scanning something in the ocean. And he thought it was quite unusual. This is another case that was sent to me personally, and he got my details and sent me an email, and then I called him. But what's really unusual about this incident is not just the sighting of this object that was actually on the ocean, scanning the oceans, is that soon after he spotted the craft, all of a sudden the craft was on the beach, and he said that an entity came out of the craft and approached him. And he said that he got a download from this entity in terms of pictures, and not so much verbalization, but pictures of microplastics in the ocean, and their concern about microplastics in the ocean. And he reached out to touch it, and then he got this feeling of dread over him, and then the creature went back into the craft and left. And unfortunately, we don't have any evidence for it, because he didn't take any photographs, or didn't, there's no evidence on the sand, because the waves that come in wash the evidence of the craft being on the sand, etc. But I felt that it sounds quite a incredible story, and it's so hard to believe. But I found him extremely credible, and I found it interesting that there was a connection between the actual entities being concerned about microplastics in the ocean, because this is one thing that there's a big problem with currently that we have with microplastics in the ocean.
Yeah, and it certainly wouldn't be the first case or story that I've heard where there are these encounters with these beings, and there's some message translated that, we have concerns about, this problem going on your Earth, the pollution, the, whatever the crisis is at the moment. But there's quite a few stories in that vein, which might touch upon something I hope I get to ask you a little bit later, and I'll bring it up. But this benevolence. factor to some of these stories, these encounter stories, is really interesting to me. The other part of
Hmm.
that story that I found interesting, because it's been on my mind, is the UFO over the ocean. I'm starting to see that connection quite a bit more these days, with
Hmm.
UFOs having something to do in and around water, big water. And I don't know what that is. I'll have to do some more digging, but that was an absolutely incredible story as well. Oh my gosh.
Hmm.
When did that take place?
So that happened. I think it happened in about 4 or 5 years ago. I think he contacted me a couple of years ago. I'd have to actually look at my notes, but it wasn't that long ago.
Oh, okay.
Um,
Okay. Okay. All
yeah.
right. All right. Well, do you have any like stories that have taken place of animal mutilation in your country? And that sounds so weird to ask, but the thing is, like, this season, it's been so overwhelming. There's been so many subjects. I wanted to cover this subject and just couldn't. I couldn't do it justice. So I thought, the perfect person to ask is somebody in the know about this. Yeah, I would love to hear if you've got any examples of this taking place.
Yeah, we have. You hear about it mainly in the States, but it does occur worldwide, and we do have animal mutilations in Australia. I was involved in interviewing a farmer in 2018 in Queensland again. I mean, most of them occur in Queensland for some strange reason,
Hmm.
and they're in really remote areas. And there's not just one farmer, but there's multiple farmers out there. And in northern New South Wales, near Casino and Lismore, we had an incident where in the 70s, I wasn't involved then, but I contacted the original farmhand that experienced the mutilations in the 70s. And I spoke to him about, like what actually happened. And there were several cattle that were mutilated in terms of their excisions that are typical of cattle mutilations, where they have what's called a jaw swipe, where there's a bit of tissue removed around the jaw, the jowls, exposing the teeth. The tongue is missing. The eye might be taken out of the eye socket. There's often an anal coring to a certain depth. There's an udder removed, but there's no blood, no sign of struggle, and there's no tracks. And so we believe that these mutilations are actually occurring while the animal is still alive.
Oh.
And so there's no struggle. So how this is possible, I don't know, because basically, how do you restrain a cow or a bull and do these mutilations without any struggle? So basically, these mutilations occurred in the 70s, and I spoke to a veterinarian as well, who looked at he did autopsies on some of the mutilations, and he was a bit puzzled, although he said to me that the cuts were done with surgical precision, but it wasn't impossible for an experienced butcher to do it with a very sharp knife, which I didn't agree with, but he was saying other things which lent to it being more paranormal, in the sense that there was the way the tissue was removed from the bone was really interesting, because some of the tissue that was removed from the bone didn't disrupt this very fine layer called periosteum on the bone. Mm-hmm. And he said that he doesn't know how that's possible. When you're cutting tissue off an animal, and particularly if you get near bone, the periosteum, which is a very fine single cell layer of tissue right next to the bone, is always disrupted. And even when you have cattle being eaten by predators, that layer is always disrupted. In these cases, it wasn't. It was just as if you'd boiled the tissue off and just taken it off. So it's interesting that we've got this anomaly where the tissue is taken off cleanly without disrupting or the bone or the fine layer of tissue on the bone. Usually these mutilations occur in really remote areas where it's out of sight from human purview. So basically, it's usually in, and these properties are quite large properties. You're talking about like 10,000, 30,000 acre properties or even larger, and they're in really remote areas. So, one of the farmers told me that if the cow was on a hill, its legs were up, which means that it just fell. So the mutilation, when it occurred, it just fell on the spot, so it didn't struggle. So because its feet were pointing uphill. I've heard of mutilations where there's been broken bones, so it might have even been dropped from a great height. But we get mutilations not only of cattle, we get kangaroos that have been mutilated.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's the same. You're seeing the same things throughout. Okay.
Yeah, it had the jaw swipe, so it was just as if it was a cattle mutilation, the same sort of like surgical areas the surgical precision and the same areas that they would attack would tend to go for in a cow. So you'd see the jaw swipe in the kangaroo and its anal coring. And so we've had kangaroo mutilations. We've had sheep mutilations. I had someone email me with photographs of a ram that was mutilated in Bendigo a few years back. And what's interesting is these often there's lights that have been seen like shortly after or shortly before the mutilations. The case of the ram in Bendigo, there was a light seen over the fields by a guest that happened to be staying at the house prior to the ram being found, and he described it as a red light, and he thought it might have been a drone, but like it was in the middle of the night, and basically who'd be flying a drone over someone's field in the middle of the night.
Right.
And with the mutilations in Queensland, we've had, I've spoken recently to a couple of farmers where they are absolutely adamant that it's extraterrestrial in nature. So this is not me, saying what, I just asked them, I says, look, what do you think? Who do you think's doing this? Yeah. And they're saying that there's absolutely no doubt in their mind it's extraterrestrial in nature.
Are they basing that off of like lights that they've seen around, like just?
Well, yes, lights, and also people that have seen lights. Not only them, but people that tell them they've seen lights, and then they discover a mutilation, and also the fact that they can see the evidence themselves. They can see that the cuts are so precise. They're saying that there's no way that anyone could have done this with no blood lying around. Definitely not predators. And there was one farmer that had a friend who lifted up the leg of a cow to inspect it after a mutilation, and his hands started burning. So not quite sure what.
Has there been like radiation found?
Well, that's what I was thinking. I was thinking it could be some sort of gamma radiation or something like that. But I don't know whether they've actually looked at, whether anyone's got a Geiger counter and actually measured the radiation levels around the cattle at the time. It's something that, I suppose, and there's been reports of foul odors as well, like an ammonia type odor. And what else? I think ammonia or some sort of odor which is pungent to around the cattle at the time, of the mutilation. And also predators don't touch them. So You don't get any crows, or we don't have a lot of predators in Australia. We've got dingoes and foxes, but the larger birds, the birds of prey like the wedge-tailed eagle and whatever, won't touch them. In fact, there was one carcass that wasn't touched for 18 months via predators. It just was not touched at all.
See, that's how you know there's something not good about, the carcass, of course, the meat, something not good, because the predator is not going to just walk away from that. They're just not.
Yeah, but you sort of like wonder how they're sensing it, and what sort of how are they sensing that this is something that they shouldn't touch is another thing.
Yeah. Well, animals' eyes, you know this, are so different. They're seeing all this stuff that we can't see. They hear things that we can't hear, different frequencies, pitches. So who the heck knows what they're seeing or sensing or smelling, or that is
exactly.
Yeah. Wow. And I was just thinking, like, is it like commonly thought that these mutilations are taking place instantaneously just because of the no signs of struggle and and the positions that they're found in, legs in the air? Like, is it accepted that it's like an instantaneous thing? Is that what it's thought?
I think that's I think I read something about that quite a while ago, where it has to be something instantaneous, like where everything is done in one fell swoop, and as you say, there's no struggle, and I really don't know how that's possible. Some people saying, oh, it's some sort of robotic thing, it's extraterrestrial, but it's robotic, and like there's a machine that does it all in the one go, and it's a bit like crop circles where they're laid in one, within a couple of seconds. They're not laid down over time, they're laid down in seconds. Bit like how the mutilations are occurring. But it's hard to say because no one's ever witnessed anything, although there was an account in the United States where a lady was actually allegedly taken on board a craft while they were mutilating a calf that they picked up off the ground, and her daughter was with her. Her name was Judy. I forgot her last name, I'm sorry. Basically, you could probably look it up, but Leo Sprinkle, who was a ufologist way back then, had regressed her, and but she was coming back from a bingo game with I think her mother and her daughter in the car, and as they were driving home, this is late at night, she spotted a craft, and they saw this calf being taken up into the craft, and then she stopped the car, and then all of a sudden to look at what was going on, and then all of a sudden she found herself in the actual craft with her daughter there, and they're observing the mutilation actually happening in the craft. And then they wanted to examine her daughter, and she thought that they were going to mutilate her daughter, but she said, obviously she was quite frightened by it, but they said, no, we're not going to do anything to your daughter, we're just going to examine her, and then you'll be back in your car. And that's what happened. And so the video is available on YouTube, I think. But that's the only instance where that I can gather that anyone's actually ever witnessed something like this happening. But it can't be attributed to anything prosaic in terms of people. I suppose if you've got cultists that are out there that are doing satanic rituals and killing animals, they don't, do surgically precise cuts, And
if cultists and if human beings were doing this regularly, even behind the cloak of a cult, then we would know how it's taking place. We would know how they are doing it. You know what I mean? Like,
well, there's various theories. They're saying that it could be the government, something that the government's involved in, but I can't imagine them. How many governments are there that are doing this? It's happening worldwide, and it's happening in remote areas. And why would they, send a helicopter out to pick up a cow in the remote regions of Australia to mutilate it and then drop it down and then go back to their laboratory? I just can't imagine they're saying that it could be some sort of mad cow disease surveillance. I don't believe that's the case. And it's definitely not predation. So
yeah, the skepticism and the need to find reasons and excuses, it gets a little too unbelievable, that side of it, to me, when you've got cases like this where obviously it is not prosaic. There is something very strange taking place here, and it's consistent and it's worldwide. Yeah, it's just not so simple as
no
as a government cover up.
And no one's ever been attributed. So no one's ever been caught doing this. But no one's been since 1967, when the I think it was 1967, where there was a horse in Colorado that was mutilated, and it was worldwide news. The name of the horse was Lady, but the press nicknamed her Snippy for obvious reasons, and basically that was one of the first well-known animal mutilations that occurred. But ever since then, no one's ever been implicated or caught red-handed doing this. So it's a genuine mystery.
Yeah, well, they're lucky I don't catch them if that's what's going on, because I love animals. Well, you guys got some things going on over there. My goodness.
It's just like any other country, I suppose.
Oh yeah, we're all the same. Is the Australian government as good at keeping a lid on things over there as the U.S. government is?
I think that the Australian government's just not interested, because I did send a letter to Richard Marles, who is our Minister of Defence, and he forwarded that to one of his offsiders, and basically my response was, well, my letter to the Minister of Defence was, we should find like-minded parliamentarians who are interested in the UAP phenomenon and do what's happening in the States with your senators. I'm really impressed by your senators, Gillibrand, Marco Rubio, Tim Burchett. They really push the UAP issue, and they're so interested in it. But our parliamentarians are not like that. We've got one, Senator Wish-Wilson, who's a Tasmanian Green senator. He has broached the issue in Parliament a few times, but it's met with, it was a moot point as far as Parliament's concerned. And my letter was to suggest that to the Minister of Defence that we should do the same thing that's going on in the States, because the UAP issue could be a safety issue in terms of pilot interference with UFOs, with UAPs, pilot interference with UAPs, and these reports could be out there, but we're not getting them because the pilots aren't saying anything, or our airspace is probably less busy than, obviously less busier than what what it is in the States, but their recourse was basically just to say that we don't want to spend the money tracking these anomalous phenomenon, and we're not really interested in doing it. And so I don't know, I'm just really disappointed that the Australian government is not being proactive about this, like the American government is. It's a different situation though, because with you guys, it goes a lot deeper. There's this allegation with whistleblowers coming out now saying that there's a lot of corporate aerospace industries now that are, well, not a lot, but there's a couple of corporate aerospace companies that have actually got this material, and have not only got the material but have actually intact spacecraft. So I suppose there's a push by the senators because they want to know, obviously, whether this is true or not. But here we don't have that same scenario where, there's not an urgent need to actually know what this is about, because we don't have the craft or we do have, we do get reports, and we get a lot of reports here, but I suppose it's not as serious as what it is in the States, where
yeah,
it's a big issue.
or they're just not as publicly, known or suspected to be taking place. I mean, it could very well be so many more than, even you're aware of. But I have hope that, worldwide it will begin to take place, and hopefully what's going on in the US now will continue to take place. I feel like, because I went through, I was listening to the hearings and, the news kind of trickling out, and Gillibrand and Rubio, were pushing for it, but it just felt like they were just pushing up against a brick wall. Like there was no going anywhere with their push until the whistleblowers.
Yeah.
Until David Grush and that an incredible interview that he did with Ross Coulthart, and that, I think that's just kind of torn the lid off of it. Like it feels like just this ball rolling downhill, and it's gaining steam, and it's just not going to stop. So I hope to see that spread worldwide as well. I hope to see it everywhere. Just a full disclosure. But on the David Grush, that being said about David Grush's interview, like this felt like a really just monumental moment, like just an incredibly important interview. And yet it seems like there's a lot of folks who don't really, really grasp how important it actually is. So I'm glad that you brought it up, because I did want to ask you about some of those points that they covered in that interview, that talk together. He said some pretty interesting, pretty important things, talked about dead pilots, non-human intelligence. This is something that we've all suspected. We all know, but it's just never been said so blatantly like that before. Yeah. He did say, though, he seemed hesitant to label it as extraterrestrial, and that was curious to me. I was wondering, what are your thoughts on that distinction between non-human intelligence and extraterrestrial? He didn't want to go there.
Tune in next week for the second half of my conversation with Dr. Stankovic as we further explore David Grush's interview with News Nation and discuss some of the important revelations divulged during that broadcast, and so much more. In the meantime, you can follow Roger on the socials that I have linked below, and I encourage you to do so. He knows a lot about the UAP and ET subject. It is his passion, and he consistently shares that education across his platforms. And he's just the nicest chap. He'll love to hear from you. Tell him you heard him here, and Kristen says, howdy. You can also follow this show on the socials at Paranormal Girl Pod for updates, announcements, and the occasional meme. You want to share your feedback and thoughts? Shoot me a message at paranormalgirlpod@gmail.com. If you especially loved this episode, rate and review wherever you heard it. And don't forget, sharing is caring, listeners. Word of mouth is by far one of the best ways to help this show reach new ears and grow, and I thank you so much for it. That's a wrap on this week's episode. See you guys again next time. Until then, stay safe, keep the nightlight on, and sleep with one eye open.